In conversation with Mithran Somasundrum. Mithran Somasundrum was born in Colombo, grew up in London, and currently lives in Bangkok, where he works as an electrochemistry lab. His short stories have been published in The Sun, Inkwell, the Minnesota Review, Natural Bridge, Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and the Best Asian Short Story 2017, among others. His stories have been shortlisted for the Bridport Prize 2021 and received a special mention in the Gallery Beggar 2024 prize. And in today's episode of Photo Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Mithran Somasundrum. How are you doing today, Mithran? Welcome on the show.
Fine, fine, I'm great, and thanks a lot for inviting me on. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited really to have you on the show today. I've been shocked to some of your works on the internet. I find it to be quite amazing, and I'm excited we are here to sit down and have a conversation around them. So thank you very much for coming on.
yeah, you're quite welcome. Yeah, I'm glad to
Yeah.
be here.
My pleasure too. So, Mitra, I need to first say that I am taken aback by the description page of your book, The Case of the Vanishing Con Man, which sounds to
Yeah,
me to be quite puzzling, quite amazing, quite lovely, quite awesome, and that title, even for a book, it's something that is quite uncommon as well. Now, I wanted to ask you, can you tell us about the foundation of the making of this book? How does this book come about? When, where, and how do you get the inspiration? What led you to telling the story? Just a foundation, a background into the making of the book. That'll be nice.
well, basically, the novel came about from a series of short stories that I wrote. It's about a private detective called VJ and his assistant, a young Thai woman called Doi,
Mm.
and they run a sort of combined translation and detective agency. Um, as for where all this came about, originally it came from a series of short stories. Um, a long time ago, when I first came to Bangkok, and this is 1994, I,
Yeah.
I was um, I was around the center of Bangkok's. I think it was near the Pratunam area.
Mm.
And I saw this sign sticking out from the side of a building. I wish I'd taken a picture of it now. It it said translations detective.
Oh,
In my memory of it, it was a red painted sign on a white background.
wow.
And that sort of stuck in my head. And it's when I came to Bangkok that I started writing properly, or I started writing in a regular way.
Oh, wow.
And that title, Translations Detective, made me want to write about somebody who was a translator and a detective. So
Mm.
that's where I thought about BJ and his assistant Doi. When I started writing this, I hadn't been in Thailand for very long, just a few months. And I don't know, maybe for that reason, I made VJ everything that I wasn't. I was a newcomer
Yeah.
to Thailand, so I made him an old hand. I could hardly speak any Thai, so I made him a translator. I
Mm.
even set him in a part of the city, Chinatown, that I didn't really know. And then the resulting story wasn't that great because I didn't really know enough about Thailand or enough about Bangkok to write a detective story. It didn't get accepted anywhere. But
Mm.
then I went on to writing other things. Eventually, I started getting short stories accepted here and there. I had a standalone short story accepted by Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, not about VJ, but something else, a story set in Laos about someone who winds up helping a Khmer Rouge leader on the run escape without
Yeah.
realizing that's what he's done. And then sometime later, when I was back in England just to see my parents, I had time on my hands. And I don't know what made me think about it, but I thought, I know, I'll write another story about VJ. I don't, that was maybe 4 years later from the 4 years after the first short story.
Mm.
And I don't think I'd consciously thought about him and Doi during that time, but it's as
Wow.
though they stayed alive in my head somehow. It was as though they were always real to me, but I just
Wow.
hadn't lived in the city long enough to know what their lives consisted of.
Mm.
So then I started writing short stories about. BJ and Doy. I had four of them published in Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine, and then I thought I'd like to try and take him onto longer cases. So I went from that to writing a novel about him. Um,
Wow.
the title of the novel was actually the title I tried it with was it was originally called Bangkok Phantoms, and the publisher didn't like that, and they said it ought to be the case of something. They just thought that was better. So it kind of fits the story to make it the case of the vanishing con man.
That's a lovely one, really. I love your take and your short, beautiful description about the making of that. Sounds to me to be quite amazing, to be quite awesome and quite beautiful. And I like you to show the book to the camera, just
Oh yeah, sure.
what it
So
looks like.
this is if you can see that,
Wow,
that's the cover
beautiful.
of the book. It's published by Joffe Books. They're a publisher. They're an independent publisher in the UK. They're based in Shoreditch in London.
Mm.
If you want me to tell you what it's about roughly, or
Yeah, that would be fine too. No worries. That's good.
okay, so but basically what happens in this story is that a writer writes a book about a provincial godfather, an organized crime boss.
Mm.
This guy lives in a province called Samutsakorn, and he's a highly ruthless person, and he sort of kills his way to the top
Oh,
until he runs all the the organized crime in Samutsakorn, and then he uses his money to come to Bangkok and sort of establish himself as a kind of semi legitimate construction boss. He comes
mm,
to Bangkok and he goes into the construction business,
mm,
and the whole thing's written in a very critical, sneering kind of way, and it's obvious to everyone who reads the book that it's about a real person. That
oh,
there's a guy called Kun Plum who fits all of this exactly. So
yeah.
everybody assumes it's about him. Then then the writer gets shot in the leg by a guy wearing a balaclava, and everyone assumes Kun Plum did this to teach him a lesson.
Mm,
And so all this is all the backstory to the novel. This is the backstory, and then the
oh,
novel begins with Kun Plum summoning VJ and telling him, I didn't have anything to do with this shooting.
mm,
It wasn't on my orders, and it bothers him that people think it was him. This non-entity writer,
mm,
and why the hell would I care about this nobody?
mm,
It kind of bothers him that people think he cares. So so he tells VJ, bring me the name of the shooter. So VJ says, okay, he takes the case. And then a couple of days later, Kun Plum's wife summons VJ. So he goes to see her, and she tells him that this Kun Plum type character in the novel
mm,
is is not just like her husband in a general sense, but in terms of really specific, painstaking details.
yeah.
For instance, the school her children went to, the uniform her chauffeur wears, all these kinds of things.
Wow.
And the thing is, the fictional Kun Plum character in the novel
Yeah.
has got a mistress, and
Oh.
and so because all these other details in the book are correct, she's convinced that the mistress must be real as well.
Oh.
So she
Wow.
tells VJ, "Bring me the name of the woman." And if you take this case, whatever my husband's paying you, I'll pay you double.
Mm,
And the thing is, VJ is in money troubles. He
yeah.
had to go to a moneylender, a loan shark, to get the money to pay her salary. And
Mm,
this guy is now, and as with all these things, there's a really high rate of interest, and he's
yeah.
been having trouble making the payments. One of the goons from the loan shark has visited him and told him
Wow.
that if he doesn't make the next payment soon, he's going to use a claw hammer on his ankles and turn
Wow.
his feet all the way around so they point backwards. So VJ needs the money, so he takes that job as well. So he's basically investigating the writer on behalf of the crime boss, and he's investigating
Oh.
the crime boss on behalf of his wife. I mean, he knows
Wow.
it's a dangerous thing to do. If Kun Plum finds out that the private detective he's hired is, among
Mm,
other things, investigating him, it's not going to end well, but he needs the money. Um,
Mm.
and then things get more complicated after that. I can't really tell you how they get more complicated because it'll spoil some of the surprises in the book. But
Mm.
along the way, VJ finds himself needing to track down a con man
Mm.
who seems to have gone missing. In fact, he seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. But VJ needs to find this guy, and that's where the title of the book comes from.
Mm. Oh wow, that's a lovely one, and I can even see in the cover the typewriter in front of it, which I think really do resonate with the story you just shared. Quite beautiful, really. Thank you for that.
They did a really good job with the cover. I
Cover,
really
yeah.
like the cover that Joffe Books produced for this.
I'd also like to go back to your previous book. That's a case of the vanishing comma. Where did the
Yeah,
idea for Vija, the private detective, come from? And also, do you have any other mystery cases lined up for him, if peradventure?
yeah. Well, first of all, where the idea came from. I mean, like I said, it was seeing that sign on the side of the building, translations detective. Before that, honestly, I don't know what it was in a funny kind of way. I remember sitting on a bus in Bangkok and this sentence came out the window and into my head. And
Mm.
it began, how did it go? It was the rains were long overdue and the city was turning into dust.
Oh,
A thin
wow.
film of it lay over everything, the streets, the
Mm.
buses, the people,
Yeah.
everything, everyone was tired and everything was hot. And
Mm.
then for some reason, I thought that would be a good way to start a short story.
Right.
And then for some unknown reason, I convinced myself that it ought to be a mystery story, a private detective novel. I have no idea why. I don't know. I think I've been
Mm.
reading a few Raymond Chandler novels or something. So
Wow.
that was the beginning to start that story. And like I said, that's the one that wasn't published because
Oh.
I didn't know enough about I didn't know enough about Thailand really. I'd only been here a couple of months. But
Mm.
that was the beginning of it, I guess.
Wow.
The sign on the building that I never photographed and I should have done,
Oh,
and
wow.
that sentence appearing in my head. So that answers the first part of your question. The
Yeah.
second part, have I got anything else lined up for him? Yeah, I have. I'm really close to finishing the second novel about VJ.
Mm.
It's going to be called the Case of the Janus Smuggler.
Oh, wow.
I've got the actual first draft here. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
That's the first draft of the
Oh,
second one.
goodness. That's a lot.
That's it's about 320 pages. Out
Oh.
of that, I've typed in about 100, so I've got a lot more to type, and it's almost finished. I think I might actually finish it maybe next week sometime. It's really close to the end.
Wow.
And the idea of a Janus smuggler, the idea is that every smuggling network
Mm.
contains a Janus. You know, Janus is
Oh.
the Roman god with two faces.
Oh.
That's where January comes from. You know that he looks both ways into the last year, backwards into the last year, forwards into the next year.
Mm.
And the idea is that every smuggling network contains a Janus. It
Mm.
means somebody who deals with the illegal end, but
Yeah.
also has a respectable front. So
Mm.
if everybody before the Janus knows they're involved in something illegal, and
Yeah.
everybody in the chain after the Janus thinks is an innocent who thinks they're doing something
Yeah.
legal. And basically, this story kind of follows on from the characters that appear in the case of the Vanishing Conman. I mean,
Mm.
basically, one of the characters that appears in that book is VJ's ex-girlfriend, Marlene.
Mm.
When I wrote the short stories, I made VJ single. Um, it just seemed easier to do. I didn't go into why he was single. But then when I
Yeah.
started writing a novel about him, I thought, there should be he should have some background. He should have some kind of hinterland.
Mm.
So, so I invented an ex-girlfriend for him called Malini, and I said she works in a shopping mall, a real place called River City in Thailand, where they
Yeah.
specialize in antiques.
Mm.
And she works in and she's quite rich from a sort of high serve family, and she works about selling antiques and she organizes auctions.
Interesting.
I just mentioned all this stuff. I never expected her to appear in the story,
Mm.
but then later on in the novel, there's one particular scene where VJ goes to an illegal casino, and
Yeah.
he's there to try and get a lead on the con man. He wants to
Mm.
the con man used to be a greeter in this casino, and he's
Oh.
talking to people to try and find somebody who remembers him.
Oh.
And when I came to the rewrite, I didn't think that scene really worked. It just seemed very flat. And
Mm.
I thought, what can I do to make it more interesting? And then I thought, I know, what about if he meets Marlene there? So he
Mm.
goes to the casino and she's there with her current boyfriend, who's this rich businessman guy called Chu. And
Mm.
um and she tells Vide that now she's engaged. And then they end up playing at the same table for a bit. And there's a kind of little bit of spark still between them,
Yeah.
both on his side and on her side. And I just thought that made the scene more interesting.
Uh,
Um, and then after I finished this novel, the Conman novel, I sort of went down this rabbit hole and found myself reading about the smuggling of Khmer antiques from Cambodia into Thailand.
Cambodia.
It happened it had been going on for a long time. Westerners were doing it, and then the
Mm.
Khmer Rouge were doing it, and then it all finally stopped in about 98 after the
Wow.
Khmer Rouge were overthrown. And then that created a kind of cottage industry and people making fakes. That there are villages
Mm.
in Cambodia where they make fake um,
Wow.
Khmer statues that are really hard to tell from the real thing. And so, having read about all of this, I thought, this is
Facts.
a good thing for VJ for a case.
Mm.
And then suddenly I thought, well, what about Marlene? One book ago, without planning anything, I'd had her working in an antique shop, so
Mm.
it fit. So basically, in the next novel, what happens is that she comes to him and she tells him that one of the other antique dealers in one of the other shops, an English guy who's a friend
Yeah.
of hers called Arthur Cavendish,
Mm.
he he falls out of his excuse me, he falls out of his balcony in his apartment on the 22nd floor, and the police don't think there's anything suspicious about it. Decide there
Mm.
isn't. Basically, um, when this happens, his wife is out having dinner with friends. It was the maid's night off. There's no
Mm.
sign of breaking and entering. There's no sign of any kind of struggle. So the police decide that, well, it's either an accident or it's suicide, and they're not going to investigate it further.
Mm.
But well, Marlene tells VJ, first of all, it can't be an accident because the balcony rail's too high.
Mm.
It's almost chest height. You can't accidentally fall over that. And she's convinced it's not suicide because,
Mm.
she was only having coffee with the guy a couple of days ago and he seemed fine. So VJ agrees to take the case. Um, and then he finds some information out that it does actually look quite a bit like suicide.
Mm.
But he keeps investigating anyway, mostly because he just wants to try and get Marlene back in his life. And he wants to try
Mm.
and convince her that she sort of went to chew on the rebound. So he carries on investigating just for that reason. And then he
Mm.
starts to find things out. And the information he finds out leads back to a very old, well developed smuggling network that's
Right.
been taking Khmer statues out of Cambodia and into Bangkok, and
Mm.
also it's the mystery of what happened to a particularly notorious Khmer Rouge leader, um, who somehow escaped before he could be put on trial.
Wow.
And so that's what the next one's going to be about. And
Wow.
it's almost done. A little
Wow.
bit more.
That's a lot, really, you've gotten going, Mithran. I hope you find some time to sleep.
Yeah, well,
Because that's a lot you're working
no,
on.
like
Quite,
I usually just write in the mornings, so it's
oh,
okay.
quite
Yeah, I try
commendable.
and get up early and write in the morning before I have to go to work. That's
That's a lovely one. Thank you for sharing. And also, Mitra, I see that you have another book titled The Marks Under My Face. Would you like us to talk?
Yeah, that's
Tell us about the making of that as well.
yeah, that's this one here,
Beautiful
the mask under
cover.
my face. Yeah, this one was published in Singapore. It's
Oh,
by a small indie publisher in Singapore called Kitab. And that's actually my first novel. I wrote that
wow.
one before The Case of the Vanishing Con Man. So
Mm,
that was the first novel I published.
wow.
Um, it's it's about more directly about the topic that The Case of the Vanishing Con Man looks at slightly, which is about the impunity of the rich and powerful, which
Mm,
is something that does happen. Well, it happens everywhere in the world, and it happens in Thailand a lot. And
mm,
basically, the book is about the son of a traffic cop who winds
wow.
up unknowingly working for the rich man who killed his father. So what happens is there's this guy called Surapat, a young guy in his 20s.
Mm,
He kills a traffic policeman in a nightclub. It's a
wow.
disagreement about a woman, and there's an outcry about this because it's not the first time he's done something like this, and his family have always found a way of getting him out of it. And this traffic cop has a wife called Atia
Mm,
and a young son, a 10-year-old son called Den.
mm,
And there's a great deal of outcry about all of this.
wow.
And also there are particular old money families in Thailand who don't like Surapat's family, and they want to stir up this trouble, stir up this sense of outrage using the press and so on, which is pretty
Mm,
easy to do because people are angry anyway. So,
yeah.
for instance, the cremation ceremony for um, for the officer for Narong
Mm,
almost turns into something like a political
mm,
protest, and so um, Surapat's family decide they need to get him out of Thailand. So
mm,
they sort of sneak him out of Thailand into Laos. Problem is, he
wow.
then gets in trouble in Laos, and so they find a way to get him into to England on a false passport. And
Mm,
first of all, he's fine because his dad's got lots of money and he has a nice life living in a flat in South Kensington. And then the 1996 economic crash comes and the value of the
wow.
baht drops like a stone. And suddenly his father can't afford to support him in this life anymore. And he
Mm,
ends up living somewhere else in quite reduced circumstances.
wow.
And this changes him. It changes him physically and it changes him mentally. And so about the first two-thirds of the book are about that, and the last two, and then the last third of the book
Mm,
continues 10 years later. Den's now a 20-year-old, and
wow.
he gets a job as a driver for this reclusive guy, um,
Wow.
to Surapat. He doesn't know who's been living under assumed name back in Thailand all this time.
Mm,
Um, and the story is told from three points of view. It's told from Surapat's point of view, from Den, and from Den's Den's mother, Atia.
that's an amazing one, really. I love your take on that. Quite beautiful, quite lovely, and that sounds quite amazing, even just like the other ones you've mentioned so far. I love the description of your books. They're quite educative, quite didactic, and quite interesting. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks.
Yeah. Now, I'd like us to diversify a little bit and go into the topic, subject of readers' feedbacks. Because one of
Yeah,
the things that I love wholeheartedly about writing, and as a writer myself, is to sit
yeah,
back, fold my hands, and listen to the arrays of feedbacks dropping in from review sites and platforms.
yeah,
I want to agree with me that one of the things that makes literature to be quite complex is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions.
yeah,
Sometimes the readers might get the message intended by the author, sometimes they might
yeah.
be close to getting the message, sometimes they might be far from getting the message, and sometimes they might just hilariously misunderstand the message and interpret the book upside down. And as hilariously fun as this sound, I would like to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? How does that make you feel as a storyteller?
Well, if somebody obviously if they like what you read and if they get it, then that's great.
Hmm.
and in a way, if they don't, I think it's still nice. I mean, I always think that, we're living in attention-starved times.
Right?
And if somebody actually spends the time to read one of my books, and if it doesn't work for them, and then they take the time to think about and articulate why it didn't work for them, that's a gift, really. I mean, whether they liked it or not, they gave you the gift of their time and their attention.
Mm,
So yeah, I like any reviews, really. I like any reviews. I
mm,
mean, sure, it's a sort of ego bath if the reviewer happens to like it, but
mm.
I think all reviews are gifts. That they're
Yeah,
they're a
they
gift of the
have.
reader's time.
Absolutely. I love your take on that. That's quite amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. And you've written lovely novels so far. And I just wanted to ask you, because I'm always fascinated and surprised by how authors, especially novelists like yourself, would sit down
Yeah,
and craft long sentences and bring words together in a way that sentences makes paragraph and paragraph makes pages and pages make chapters and chapters go hand
yeah,
in hand, make a great novel like you've just showed to the camera. And sometimes it got me wondering, how do these people sit down and craft these words and bring these words together and write this book? Because I know writing book takes a whole lot of time. It's a lot of dedication. It's a lot of hard
yeah,
work,
yeah.
a lot of talent and skill involved in it as well. Now, I wanted to ask you, as far as writing is concerned, how exactly do you get your inspirations and ideas for the stories that you've crafted so far? Where exactly do they come from?
I think it's a lot of different places and a lot of different sources. Some things are very direct, and some things are quite indirect. Like with the story I'm writing now, that's very direct, just because I went down this internet rabbit hole reading
Wow.
about smuggling Khmer statues into Thailand.
Mm,
So I read about all this stuff and then thought, yeah, this is a great case for VJ. But
right?
then, like I said, that first the first ever story I wrote about VJ, it was just a sentence in my head, um, that I somehow convinced myself this is how you could write, this is how you should start a private detective story,
Mm,
which, the rains were long overdue and the city was turning into dust. I don't know how I convinced myself that that was the beginning of a private detective story,
mm,
but I just did. Um, in the previous one, the mask under my face, um, there wasn't any one particular incident
mm,
that started it. It's going to sound strange to say that, because something
right?
that I don't know if you'll have heard of it. It was in the news a while ago. Is that the son of the billionaire who owns Red Bull was driving his Ferrari in Bangkok, and he ran over and killed a Thai policeman.
Oh,
And they didn't arrest him. He was allowed to get out of the country, and he'll stay outside of Thailand until the statute of limitations is finished for sure. He's going to get away with it. But I wrote the first draft of the novel before that happened.
mm,
Strangely enough, it wasn't based on that. It wasn't based on any one event, really. I just had the idea of it. I wanted to write about the impunity of the rich and powerful. And
mm,
in my own mind, it was going to be a two-handed story. I was going to write about these two sons. There
mm,
was Surapat, this child of privilege, and there was going to be Den, the 10-year-old boy who's the son of the traffic cop.
yeah,
That's how in my head the story was going to go. And
yeah,
then right at the beginning, um, Den's mother, Atia, puts her head round the door, and she has to come into the room and tell Den that his father's dead. And
mm,
at that point, she became the third character in the story. It
wow,
it wasn't even a conscious decision from me. It was
wow,
just something that happened. She didn't give me any choice.
wow,
Um, it was as though she just turned up and said, "If you can't write about my son unless you write about me." So
mm,
then it became a three-handed story for
um,
for the three of them.
oh, that's a lovely one, really. That's a beautiful one. I love the making of the inspirations and ideas because sometimes this is one of the things that intrigue me most about speaking to authors. And some people have asked stuff, I
Yeah,
be like, well, Peter, I got inspirations from real life stories. I got inspirations from stories of friends or that of family members that I've heard. I got
yeah,
inspirations from, news, stories that I hear in the news, hilariously. Sometimes I get inspiration from my own personal life experiences that I've been through, lived experiences and that of others as well. And sometimes I will say, yeah, well, sometimes too, quite shockingly, I get inspirations from my dream that I have when I go to sleep at night. And it's a
yeah.
different ways people get inspirations and ideas, and it just gives me quite amazing. This is one of the things I love about writing, how quite diverse, how quite different artists and writers get their inspirations from. It's a beautiful one, really. Thank you for sharing yours with us.
Thanks. I definitely don't think there's one route to a story idea. That there
Yeah,
isn't one route. Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you. And I'd like to have your advice as a published author. What sort of advice would you give other writers who are still currently struggling with writing and publishing a book?
Well, I think unless you get lucky, it's probably going to be a long process. It's always been a long process for
Yeah, it's
me.
always.
Um, I mean, when you get the thing done, the thing to do is to figure out a good query letter is to whoever you're going to send it to. If you're going to send it to agents or if you're going to try independent publishers directly.
Yeah,
Um, you should also write a synopsis, and it should be fairly short, a
yeah,
couple of pages, not more than that,
yeah,
and then try and come up with a log line, some kind of pitch that will encapsulate the story in a couple of sentences. So once you've put those, and obviously, I should say before you do all that, polish up the novel as well as you can.
mm,
And then once you have all those materials ready, I'd say the
yeah,
best thing is to do is start writing your next book.
mm,
Don't don't wait until you get an acceptance letter before you start the next one.
yeah,
It'll take a very long time, and it'll probably be quite a negative process because
mm,
unless you're lucky, you can get a lot of rejection letters on the way. Rejection
yeah,
letters are much easier to take if you've got the enthusiasm of working on your next one.
mm,
So I think that's the thing to do. Just get all the materials, your submission materials ready. Get the
interesting.
query as as sharp or as good as you can make it.
Yeah,
Make a really tight, compact log line for the story.
yeah. Thank you.
Something like what they call an elevator pitch,
Yeah,
and and then yeah, just start writing the next one after that. Don't wait for acceptance before you.
yeah. Don't wait for acceptance.
Yeah,
I love that statement. You don't have to wait for it. Go ahead and do it. Thank you. Thank you for
yeah.
sharing. And just in case of we have some viewers who are watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of your book. On what platform is it available on for purchase?
Well, both publishers, Joffe Books and Kitab, are print on demand, so that you don't get them in bookshops, but you can get them
Mm,
in all the other places like Amazon or Kobo, Apple
Barnes and
Books,
Nobles.
and yeah, just any of those online places that you want to go to.
Yeah,
Also, just to add, the short stories I wrote about VJ,
yeah.
the ones that were in Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine,
Oh,
I put them together in a collection and they're free on Amazon. I set them permanently free. So if
wow.
anybody doesn't want to buy a book but wants some free short stories about BJ, you can get them on Amazon.
Interesting. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Mithran Somasundrum book directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on his website and also on other platforms. I also left a link to his
Yeah.
social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Mithran, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say this is more than
Yeah.
awesome. Very great. Quite exciting. Having a conversation with you around the beautiful titles. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me and I enjoyed being here.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure as well.